back to Sekulow. We're joined right now by the former Secretary of State, our senior counsel for global affairs, former director of the CIA, Mike Pompeo, who's got a new piece up at aclj.org on the issue we've been talking about, how the Biden administration is funding efforts to undermine Israel. And Secretary Pompeo, I want to jump right into it. So we have the State Department's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. They are soliciting nonprofit groups to apply for a nearly $1 million grant to, quote, strengthen accountability and human rights in Israel and the West Bank and Gaza. It sounds, if you were just listening to this broadcast in your car right now, it might sound a little innocuous. But what would this grant actually do?
Well, Jordan, this is something the previous administration under my leadership would never have done. It basically is an effort to undermine the central thesis of the nation of Israel as the rightful homeland of the Jewish people. And so it is promoting efforts to support UNHRC, which will talk about apartheid and oppression and occupation, when we know this is the lone democracy in the Middle East, when we know that Arabs and Christians and Jews live alongside each other inside of Israel. You have Arabs in the parliament in Israel. You don't have Jews in the parliaments of any the governments of any other Gulf state or Arab state. To think that the United States taxpayers should be underwriting efforts to undermine the Israeli government, this duly formed democratic Israeli government, is a 180-degree reversal from where we were 4 years ago, and it is dangerous for the state of Israel, frankly, to the Abraham Accords, which are such an important thing for the United States of America.
I think we all could figure out the list of groups that would want to apply for this money, Secretary Pompeo, and they're all would be, anti-Israel groups, but particularly it appears that this would be giving them an opportunity, funded by the U.S. taxpayer, to build ammunition for their support of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel.
Jordan, this is all deeply a part of what I'll describe as at least the anti-Zionist, in many cases anti-Semitic left, who truly would prefer that Israel not exist in its current form as this unique beacon for democracy in the Middle East. You saw our current ambassador there talk about how he finds the settlement in the, quote, West Bank, end of quote, infuriating. They're talking about reconstituting the consulate that in Jerusalem. We don't have a U.S. consulate the same place we have an embassy anywhere in the world. It would be illegal. It would be immoral. These are all pieces and parts of their effort to frame the Israelis as the malign actor in the Middle East, when in fact they're the ones that have created peace, created prosperity, and they're doing this all while sitting at the table negotiating with the Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians to give Iran money and more money and lifting of sanctions on their terror.
It's starting to get some attention now. I mean, there's a lot of news in the world. We got a Supreme Court nomination. We've got Ukraine and Russia still going. And, you've got a lot happening in the world. But this is starting to get some attention. We're trying to give it more attention on this broadcast through your blog at aclj.org. Now that it is starting to get attention, and the fact that the person that they would like to head up this department within the State Department, their nomination has been stalled because they were the head of the D.C. Human Rights Watch affiliate, and she's already called Israel, said that they've committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. So her nomination has been stalled in the Senate. Is there a way to block you oversaw the State Department. Is there a way for pressure from elected officials and from the American people, just this outside pressure, to effectively cancel programs like this? Is that a potential?
It is, absolutely. It'll take a lot of loud voices. It'll take hard work by organizations like the ACLJ, who makes the case for why this is so evil, so desperate, so progressive. It's absolutely the case that someone's going to have to vote, and members of Congress all across America will have to vote for this money, these appropriated funds to be spent in this way. They could block it. They ought to. And they ought to stop anybody who President Biden puts forward who's thinking about Israel in this way, that undermines the centrality of the relationship between the United States and Israel's right to exist. Those people should not occupy positions of power in the United States government and the American people and their elected officials, members of the House, members of the Senate. We can talk about the bureaucrats that are working on this. We should make sure that the United States, the American people, are deeply aware of what's taking place, and I'm confident that the vast majority of Americans would say that this is not in America's best interest to head down this progressive leftist, anti-Zionist path.
You talked about the bureaucracy inside, too, and we know there's an anti-Israel bent inside a lot of these government agencies like the State Department and USAID and others. I mean, we've got, I think it was UNRWA, the former head of UNRWA has become an assistant secretary of state for the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. I mean, UNRWA, again, it's specific for the Palestinians. It's mired in controversy, and that's who the Biden administration put forward. So it seems like there is this kind of shadow campaign against Israel happening as best they can, trying to keep it secret, trying to not make a lot of news, trying to keep these grants. Yeah, it's $1 million, so it won't be the front page news. But it feels like a shadow campaign against Israel or to pressure Israel into a certain position.
It's a deep effort, one that's gone on inside not only the American bureaucracy, but Jordan, you all have worked hard at the UN when they spend more time sanctioning and putting resolutions against Israel than they do horrific states like North Korea and China and Vladimir Putin. You know something is deeply corrupt. UNRWA itself, we stopped funding them. They were trying to provide resources to the Palestinians. Look, we don't want them to starve and die either, but it is a corrupt organization, and that money was being funneled to the leadership in the West Bank, into Abu Mazen, and to the Gaza Strip folks that were trying to commit terror against Israel. This is not something the United States taxpayers want any part of, and it's not something the Biden administration should do either loudly or in the way you described, very quietly, one piece at a time. We need to be eyes wide open on this issue, Jordan.
To shift a little, but not much far in the region, and of course this involves Israel, but also the United States. The reports that the Biden administration is lifting this terror designation, the Foreign Terrorist Organization designation for the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, as part of the U.S. trying to get back into the Iranian nuclear deal. They're not denying this. The State Department is not denying this. They won't confirm it, but they are not denying that this could be part of the deal.
The number 2 official was asked about this yesterday, and her response was, I don't have any comment on this. These are terrorists, Jordan. These are people who have the blood of Americans on their hands. These are people who are, even today, firing missiles from Yemen into Saudi Arabia, putting American lives at risk, putting American lives at risk through the cost of energy and products. We saw another Saudi Aramco facility that was under attack just, I think, 2 days ago now. To lift a terror designation on people that no one would dispute are terrorists for the sake of getting a promise from the Ayatollah may well be one of the most egregious foreign policy acts I have ever seen or ever witnessed.
You know, folks, I want to encourage you. And I want to thank Secretary Pompeo. Thank you for your time. And let me encourage everybody to go see right now at aclj.org. You'll see it right on the homepage, the brand new piece by Secretary Pompeo. The Biden administration is funding efforts to undermine Israel. It's a bold statement from a former U.S. Secretary of State, a former U.S. CIA director, that the Biden administration is doing this. And Secretary Pompeo is part of our team at the ACLJ, not just part of the broadcast, but one of our senior counsels for global affairs because of your financial support to the ACLJ. So we're able to get, again, their insight on the broadcast, insight on the blogs, but also behind-the-scenes work with Secretary Pompeo.